But when you're with somebody who's really interested in you, then you can really emerge. And just about everybody is really interesting. Their thoughts are unique, and their background is interesting, and their goals and their struggles are really fascinating. So I think it's the social context that makes the difference rather than the individual. So the problem with dating apps, I think, is that they create this very artificial situation in which everyone's being evaluated and assessed, and they're swiping left, all the time. Well, that person's not quite right, not quite right, not quite right, not quite right. The research of Eli Finkel shows that there's nothing you can measure in two individuals that will predict whether they like each other.
There's nothing you can measure.
Nothing you can measure. In fact, you can actually ask people exactly what they're looking for in a partner and find that exact person in a large database. And it's very unlikely that they'll like that person when they meet them. Yet, if you randomly pair them with strangers, 22% of people like each other when they first meet.
I wonder about the role that self-esteem plays in attraction. It's kind of what we were talking about with being desperate. Maybe they feel like a similar thing. And I wonder if there's any data that supports this idea that self-esteem or your self-perception is this invisible force that makes you attractive or not attractive. I've actually seen it in some of my friends, who I won't name, who started going to the gym, and just because they started working on themselves, it's almost like they grew 6 inches. They just were different people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of attraction we think go get the blow dry, I'll go get a better outfit, but this goes back to this point about how much of it is actually do the internal work. What do you think?
I think there's a lot to be said for that, yeah. If you have a group of friends, who really like you and you really like them, then it's easier to emerge. Mm-hmm. And, this dating situation is so artificial that people are so terrified, when they meet somebody. And instead of approaching them with curiosity about them, they're worried that they won't make a good impression. And they're so self-conscious of themselves rather than being curious and interested in the other person. And because if they're curious and interested in the other person, it doesn't matter what happens, right? I mean, you meet somebody new and you learn about them, and it's an interesting experience, and maybe they're interested in you too. So the dating experience is just kind of fun. It's about exploring, two people exploring one another. And then there's no objective, there's no real goal there. And then it's much less artificial. And then when you meet somebody you really click with, that's a wonderful experience. And especially when you meet an outlier, like I met Julie. I dated 60 women before I met Julie. She's number 61.
As you like to
I
tell
had a
us.
database. So I knew I met an outlier. For me, she was an outlier because I just loved interacting with her. It was just so much fun. And she was head and shoulders above any person I'd met before.
Do you know what's interesting though? When people look at you two, and when they look at other relationships, they'll go, okay, John, I get it. So you've got to make a database. You've got to wait till you find the one.
Right.
And this is often the cause of much procrastination as it relates to love. Everyone's looking for the Julie, They're
And
like,
there
"I've come with
isn't
Julie."
a one. That's one of the other myths. There isn't a one. And it's funny because we've seen this in our research on the opposite end of it. And here's what I mean. Every pairing of people, no matter how wonderful they are, no matter how much you love them, the two of you will always have perpetual problems between you. And those are based on either lifestyle preference differences or personality differences, always. And at some point, those conflict. And so, what we saw in our research was, something like 69% of the conflicts that couples suffer from or have are perpetual problems. They never go away. So, when I have somebody coming into my office that says, I want to find my soulmate, it's like, huh? What's a soulmate? you out of whatever in the U.S. we have 350 million people. There's probably 500,000 of them that you would find wonderful and attractive, right? So looking for the one is a big mistake because inevitably they snore at night or, they eat with their mouth open or, something that drives you crazy. So, okay, so you're not looking for the perfect person. You're not the perfect person. And that's what I was referring to earlier as, let's see each other as human beings. There is no perfection. We are all flawed. We all have cracks in us. And those can be seen as beautiful too. We don't have to be perfect to be loved. Right?
Yep, right.
It's interesting because that marries to something that I was reading about in your books, where you talk about how we're often attracted to people who are very different from ourselves, and just the very nature that they're different from us means that there's going to be that pretty much constant conflict. Why is it the case that we're attracted to people that are different from ourselves. Is that true?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem to make sense on the surface. You'd think I would be attracted to someone that likes Manchester United and, you know, like my favourite food and my favourite stuff, because then we'll get on like a house on fire. But you're telling me that we're attracted to people that like other things.
The research of Klaus Wedekind is so interesting. This T-shirt study that he did, where women smelled T-shirts that have been worn by men for at least 2 days and selected the ones they thought smelled the best. They actually were selecting, what Wedekind found was they were selecting T-shirts of men. Those pheromones were attractive. The men were as most divergent from them genetically, just in the genes of the immune system. Very divergent kinds of people smelled really attractive to these women rather than people who were like them. And actually, the experiment was done. It showed they actually liked those men better than other men they might have met.
So genetically different men.
Genetically different in terms of the immune system. So here's this evolutionary explanation of why people are searching for somebody who's really different. Because we're not really turned on by our clone. We're not turned on by people who are just like us. Julie and I are vastly different. She's, this adventurer, this outdoors person. She loves the trees and hiking, up mountain trails. I'm an indoorsman. I like sitting in my chair and reading books on mathematics and quantum mechanics and general relativity theory.
He's a consummate indoorsman.
So we're very different, but...
What's the evolutionary reason then, do you think, for why we like people that are different?
Oh, the genetic immunity. So remember, it's all about reproduction, right? So if you've got two very divergent sets of genetics in terms of the immune system, that child is going to have a broader genetic base as their immune system, as opposed to two identical or close to it, where they'd have a very narrow genetic base for immunity.
Is there anything else that if you were advising me, if I was a single man and I was saying, okay, how do I find a partner? What should I be doing or looking for? Should I make a list of things that I'm looking for? Should I be, I don't know, do you think that speed to rush into a relationship is a sign of something else further upstream? Maybe insecurity or...
You bet. Needy. And I don't like the word needy because everybody has needs. We're pack animals. We need each other. We depend on each other. But somebody who can contain themselves, as you were pointing out.
With or without you energy.
That's right.
Yeah.
And have done that internal work so that they're not looking to you to answer every problem they have.
I would give different advice to a male who's dating. I would say, just have fun. Meet people. Like when I was creating my database, I met a woman who was a survivalist. She had a .38 Magnum pistol right by her bedside, and she spent thousands of dollars on gowns to go to opera because she loved opera. And I remember sitting there in her house and saying, God, this is really interesting. I don't know if I like this person or I could be with this person, but she's fascinating. It's kind of fun getting to know her. And then at a certain point, there's somebody you meet, like I met Julie, and everything feels right. The world just kind of opens up when you talk, and your heart opens, and it's very different. It's not just interesting. It's really, there's potential there that you don't feel with anybody else.
Were you desperate when you met Julie, though?
I don't think I was. No, I don't think I was desperate. I've been divorced for about 7 years. I was looking to meet somebody close to my age who, was an interesting person. And I met a lot of interesting people, but she was different.
I asked this question in part because I wonder if someone's ever done a study where they take a group of people who are looking to find someone, and then they take a group of people who aren't really looking, and they see who has the most success. And when I say looking, I mean some people are literally looking for a husband and they feel like they need to find one within 6 months because, biological clocks and goals they might have for their lives and all these kinds of things, versus a group of people that are just open to it. And I wonder who's more attractive.
I think either one can work.
Right.
Really? I don't think there has to be a magic formula. So I think if you approach the whole situation with curiosity and wonder, and just kind of see who you meet and see what happens.
But that sounds more like this group here,
That's right. I agree with you. What you're describing is that being confident in yourself and just being curious, as opposed to, I really have to find somebody. I need to find somebody. Very, very, very different.
I think about this in part in the context of business as well, because as an investor, you get an energy from the entrepreneur that's trying to get investment from you as to whether they need you or whether you're an option. And it's so remarkable how much more likely you are to invest in a founder who makes you feel like an option. And I think and then you have these other founders, when I can literally think of one example that popped to my mind from the last couple of weeks, where they were so desperate that it was almost rude.
Wow. How did that manifest?
As in the way that they sent their emails and the way that they were like demanding and how urgent they wanted to speak to you and all these kinds of things, and how like low-key expectant they were from you, made me feel like their business wasn't doing well. Whereas, and I think about this in the context of relationships, whereas the founders and entrepreneurs that message me, where they're kind of more patient, they're kind of maybe a little bit busier. The ones that have that, I keep going back to that phrase, like with or without you energy, where you're an option to them, you're much more likely to invest. You feel like it's a privilege to invest. And I think about this from the context of the question I just asked. If someone's like, I need a husband now, versus someone's like, I'm open, I'm curious, I'm willing to go on the date and see if we're right. Because I realize that me saying yes to you is a huge investment. So I need to take my time to figure out if that investment is going to be worthwhile, because I respect myself.
Right. Yeah, maybe you're right.
Right.
Maybe it's better if you're just kind of confident than not so desperate.
Can you fake confidence, Julie? This is the problem.
No. As a matter of fact, when people try to fake confidence, they often overstep it, right? And, golly, I know I'll never forget this fellow in high school. He would brag about himself without knowing that he was bragging. He would boast and boast and boast and boast. And I realized, oh my God, I cannot stand this, because it was so fake. But, important thing, I realized that the extremity of my negative attitude towards him was because there was a part of me that was just like that felt insecure, that wanted to present, this perfect image to people that I wasn't, which is what he was trying to do. And so then it's like, oh, I've got a little work to do on myself.
Well, one thing about this dating situation that's interesting is, even though there's nothing you can measure in individuals that will predict that they like each other, once they get together and start interacting, our lab can measure if that interaction has promise or not.
How?
Really, we measure openness, the emotional connection, the fact that people are either connecting with one another, communicating with one another or not. We measure tension versus relaxation. We measure curiosity and interest. All of those things. Yeah.
So can you give me really specifically exactly how a couple would show up, really specifically, if they had promised to last and be successful together?
So if you watch their videotape and they had promised, you'd find them laughing together, mirroring each other, smiling, asking questions, being open, wondering about things. And you'd have this real sense of exploration and openness and curiosity and interest in one another. Whereas in in a couple that wasn't doing very well, you'd sense this tension, sarcasm, a lot of, negativity, bragging about themselves, talking about themselves rather than being interested in the other person.
Body language?
Body language. The ratio of positive to negative emotion in those couples would be much less than 1, whereas it would be 3 to 1 or 5 to 1 among couples who are really getting along very, very well, where there's this potential, this openness and potential.
What's the difference in body language?
Let me demonstrate it. So somebody who's overconfident, pretend he's not sitting here, is just going to be doing
So
that.
for people that aren't watching, laying back,
Laying back, your arm, stretched out over the top of the chair next to you. You're leaning back, which is come to me, come to me.
It's all me.
It's all about me, and I'm so cool. And somebody who is really engaged is going to be more kind of leaning forward and making eye contact, being fairly relaxed, not hunching their shoulders inwards, which shows they're probably depressed, they're insecure, they're hiding out. But, just relax. Their shoulders are, not up to their ears. They're allowing their eye gaze to look away as they think about something, and then they look right at you when they answer the question.
Yeah.
All of those indicators.
That ratio of I to other, I, me, mine, predominates conversations where there's all this tension.
Say that again, sorry.
Is where, the conversation is really about just myself. I'm sort of putting myself in the center versus being interested in you, being interested in us, being interested in we. And that emerges, that openness emerges in language as well.
There's also a reciprocity in the sense that, let's say you and I are meeting, you ask me some questions about myself, I'll answer those questions, but then I'll come back and ask you questions about yourself, as opposed to, go ahead, ask me more questions and more questions and more. So
I'm only happy when I'm talking about myself.
Right. Right. So, you're going back and forth, exhibiting that curiosity as opposed to just adoring somebody being curious about you, but not reciprocating by being curious about them.
It's funny because you were talking about body language a second ago, and many people will click on episodes on YouTube or podcasts that try and teach us body language. But I think, okay, you can learn some of the things, but really, again, I think body language is a symptom of what's going on inside.
How do you build confidence is really the question. Especially when you begin, let's say in a family or with caretakers who are critical and contemptuous of you. And when you have that from practically the ground up, as I did, you internalize that and you believe you're worthless because you were treated as worthless. So how do you build the confidence, right? So either through maybe therapy, through looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, all right, this is who I am, this is who I am, this is who I am. One of I used to, like almost every single woman, no matter how beautiful you are, you will always measure yourself as inferior to somebody else. Always, as a woman. I mean, you've seen already 6 million images of idealized women by the time you're 18. Think about that. So, how do you build confidence in what you look like? Go to a locker room where women are undressing and look at their real bodies and notice the variety. Notice, the whatever, woman that's larger than the standard thinner than the standard. Women come in all shapes and sizes. So do men. And just seeing the reality as opposed to the photoshopped, that's the thing that is so difficult about technology, is that these days, especially with dating apps and so on, people are photoshopping their images, or they're taking an image of themselves 30 years ago and here is what I am. And I actually still have hair. It's the reality that it's not really about the appearance. It's not even about, the IQ or whatever, or the education. It's really about, well, here we go. It's about the heart. It's about the heart. Is this a kind person? Is this a caring person? Is this a person who exhibits compassion, who treats people equally, and so on?
A dating app wouldn't work on that basis, would it?
No, and most people are lying on dating apps too. That's right.
Is there a difference in what men and women look for in a partner as it relates to attraction when they first meet?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I remember reading this paper by Eli Finkel. He says in the introduction, generally, the dating research suggests that men are looking for physical beauty and women are looking for occupational competence and wealth. But actually, when he did this really elaborate speed dating study, none of that actually manifested in people's preferences. The preferences were all in terms of what it felt like to be together. And both men and women were really similar. So when you interact with somebody, you're going to interact with them for 5 minutes in this speed dating situation. What made the difference was how much fun it was to interact with them for 5 minutes, how enjoyable it was. And men and women were the same. So the social context of dating is so important. Because if it's this very tense, evaluative context, nothing is going to work. But if it's this relaxed, sort of interested, curious context, almost everything's going to work.
Now, a lot of dating happens these days with alcohol in What about sex and the role that plays in attraction? I ask this question because I had a relationship when I used to live in New York, and I really, really liked this person. We got on all the things you described, the road trips, everything was fun. And then when it came to the point where we had sexual intimacy, it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And it was crushing for me because this person was perfect in every conceivable way. Smart, kind, fun, everything. And then the minute we moved to the next stage, it just wasn't there. I just wasn't sexually attracted
I've
to
had
them.
that experience too.
And
Yeah.
so it made me add to my list of non-negotiables a third thing. At the time, there was 2 things on that list. The first was they kind of helped me become a better version of myself, and however I want to define that. The second was this intellectual stimulation, the ability to conversate and be interested in them and them interested in me. And the third became not about appearance at all. It was purely a sexual connection. Because, and so I just wonder what the role that sexual intimacy and sexual attraction plays in having a good relationship with someone.
Yeah. I think that really varies, Stephen, because there's a huge range of the importance sexuality plays in individuals. Some people are practically asexual. Other people, it's been a really long time if they hadn't had sex in 4 hours. So, and everything in between. So I think to some degree that's an individual choice as to how important is sexuality to you, and having a wonderful sexual connection as opposed to who cares? I just want to have a cup of coffee and a pastry. So every individual needs to decide that for themselves, how important it is. And then, if it is important, even of average importance, it's really important. Yeah. But the other thing, too, that's interesting, we're talking about dating, but I've also seen relationships that have been together for a long time. And the sex falls away. but it's much more important to one person than the other, and they diverged, and it becomes, a pretty serious problem. It didn't start off that way, but it can become that way.
And what happens in those scenarios?
Well, typically it's really interesting. Of course, in second marriages or relationships at, let's say, over 40 or so, women, especially women going through perimenopause, finishing with menopause, sex hormones go way down. They go way down. And so are they still interested in having sex? Well, they may not be so interested in it that they want to initiate sex, but we're all hardwired in particular ways. So you touch there, you lick there, you stimulate here, and that wiring is going to kick in, and the sexuality will kick in again, and the sexual responsiveness will kick in. So you can work on that angle, number one. But number two, oftentimes, there have been big emotional injuries that have broken trust, that have broken emotional connection. And, okay, so two theories. One, most men in Western culture are not, they don't accept themselves if they just want to cuddle. That's not masculine, right? So everybody needs touch. But for many, many men who bought into that, the only way they can get touch is through sex. They can't just say, will you please just hold me? Women can, because women are considered, more vulnerable and softer, and it's okay for them, to ask to just be held, but not for men. So, sex becomes a difficult thing there, too, especially with an ultra-masculine man, where he's just come back from war. He wants to just be held, but he can't ask. He's got to be tough and strong and sexy. Therefore, he'll go for sex.
Any thoughts on that, John?
I think I agree with you. It's not negotiable. It's one of these intangible things that, if it's not there, it's not going to work very well.
In the beginning, if it's not there.
That's right.
Right.
I mean, I think it needs to be there.
Because it goes on a journey, all relationships.
Right.
It's funny because from doing this podcast and speaking to a lot of sort of sex that, and is there a certain amount of, because a lot of couples fall into this trap of sort of fake comparison, whether it's social media or movies, where we think, okay, if we're not having sex 3 times a week, something's wrong. I need to raise it. We need to argue about it. We need to fix it. Is there any merit to the quantity resulting in, happiness?
No relationship between quantity and happiness. Quality, yes.
Well, with the caveat that if you have two people paired together, one who is extremely sexual and, really does need sex frequently, and the other one, the opposite.
Asexual.
Who is more asexual and, can take it or leave it, wants sex maybe once a month.
That's not going to work.
That's not going to work.
One of the things me and my friends have been deliberating about is the importance of what we call desire management, which is if someone is around too much and they're there every second of every day, in the house, when I get home, everywhere, does that not to some degree start to kill the desire a little bit? One of the best things that I think I found in my relationship is that my partner's always working away, then I'm working away, and so when we see each other, it feels special and interesting. But I personally don't know that if we were both in the house 7 days a week and I worked from home with her, whether the desire would be the same. I don't know.
I think that, for example, John and I are around each other 7 days a week. And we have been for, most of our marriage, but it doesn't matter.
Is that because of my attachment style, maybe? Because, I wondered if...
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be.
I need a lot of solitude.
Yeah.
But you are around each other.
Yeah.
But you're around each other most of the time.
Well, we are, but in a house where there's enough space in the house to not be in visual contact with the other person all the time.
Right.
You see, so he's downstairs, I may be upstairs, something like that. Or I can maybe hear him, maybe not. He can hear me, maybe not. So
I think there is something wonderful about being apart and then coming together. That reunion after you've been apart for a while is really quite delicious.
You know what, though? This is so interesting. I am working with an individual right now, and they're both artists. They both travel a whole bunch, all the time. And whenever they reunite after one of them is gone, nothing. There's nothing for about 2 or 3 days, and then they have to get into the same rhythm again.
Someone said to me on this podcast, they said, you have to spend 90 minutes a week talking to your partner. And if you don't, the person actually said to me, if you don't get that into your dumb skull, you'll be spending much more time with them in divorce court.
Oh,
And
wow.
I know it was a brash thing to say, but I reflected on it and it really helped me because I don't know, I'm speaking as a man, so I can't speak for all men, I can't speak for women, but speaking as a man myself, and also on behalf of my friends with my own attachment style, I think that's important to add. I struggle naturally with conflict resolution, because conflict resolution to me sounds like blame. So when my partner says we need to talk, I'm like, oh my fucking God, what have I done now? Like,
That's right.
what have I done now? And I sit there like I feel like it's a kid in school being told off by their headmaster or a child being told off by their mother. I'm like, go on, tell me all the ways that I'm inadequate. But the framing of this idea of you're going to have to spend 90 minutes a week sitting with each other and talking regardless helped me, because he then went on to say, because if you do that, then you can get to play.
Well, I think here's my invention. I have a notebook in my back pocket,
Oh yeah, interesting.
and it's just designed for when Julie says we need to talk. And I take out the notebook and a pen, and I say, okay, talk to me. I'm taking notes. I want to know what's going on. And she'll tell me I'm disappointed in you or angry. I mean, whatever she says, I write it down
Yeah.
and reflect it back and see if I understand what she's saying.
Yeah.
And so I think it's not just 90 minutes. It's 90 minutes when you're willing to listen non-defensively.
Which is not easy.
That's not easy. That's really the work in relationships, is being non-defensive.
But that's why we wrote Fight Right, and when we gave, a talk. It's really so important to not do that you.
Blaming thing.
That blaming. It's, I feel about what's the situation, not, the way.
Two women said to me last night that I was speaking to on WhatsApp. People that I work with in a different company, they were saying to me that their partners often express how they're feeling by just sending songs out of the blue.
Sending songs?
Sending songs out of the blue.
Wow.
And I'd never heard of it, because one of them said it, and the other woman said, oh my God, my partner does that too, which is, instead of telling me how he feels, he'll send me a song which is basically a way.
Describes it.
How he feels, yeah.
And some of those songs are very romantic, and it's like, I love you, you're the best person I've ever found. But instead, he can't vocalize it to her.
Oh.
So he has to send her a Spotify link and say, listen, this is
Wow.
this. But it's the same thing, right? It's the
That's right.
inability to vocalize, which is
Yep.
difficult for men.
Keep working on it.
I am, yeah. I'm progressively getting better, but sometimes I have little relapses. If I am very busy in my mind, and then I have to have one of those we need to talk chats. So I think you're right. There needs to be a bit of a ritual around, is this a good time?
That's right.
Yeah. Will I have your attention? Or even
Yeah.
being in a different environment. Like
Well, you
said.
can make make a date to have a talk like that. When we are giving couples workshops, at the very end of it, we always give recommendations for ways of preserving the changes you're making in the relationship, the improvements. And one of them is called the State of the Union meeting, right? Where you start with 5 appreciations of each other. Things you haven't said before that you've noticed that your partner is doing right, and express your gratitude or thanks or your admiration. Then you go into, okay, so what do we need to change? What do we need to improve?
Right.
And then you finish up with this beautiful question. I just love this question. How can I make you feel loved this week? And that's closure.
You mentioned the word there, gratitude.
Yes.
Why is gratitude so important? Being grateful. For them and expressing it. Something that you two both do to each other.
I think it's indicative of a habit of mind that's really much more important. A habit of mind where you're noticing what's going right and feeling appreciative for it. And I know I wake up every morning lying next to Julie and think, I'm one lucky guy. I've got this wonderful woman and, life is good. I go through my checklist. Everybody's okay. All the people I love are all right. And I'm with her. And I get to see my grandson and my daughter. Life is good.
Yeah. I think gratitude brings you into the moment. So, and as John pointed out, you're not just looking for what's wrong, or what your partner's doing wrong. You're looking for what your partner's doing right. There's been studies, who was it, Price and Robinson, I guess, who looked at unhappy couples versus happy couples. And unhappy, it wasn't that they weren't doing things for one another, but unhappy couples only saw 50% of what their partners were doing for them.
Positivity.
Of the positivity, right. Whereas happy couples were seeing it all the time.
It's like they're wearing different sunglasses or something.
Yeah,
like a different
exactly.
filter.
Different filters.
And the negative habit of mind, really puts you in a state of being kind of irritable and grumpy all the time.
Yeah.
You're noticing other people are driving badly and being careless and making mistakes all the time. That's all you see.
Yeah.
Because gratitude puts you in a different frame of mind, so you notice actually all the good stuff that's going on.
Right.
It's more accurate.
Let me draw a parallel. One of the things that I've done in my private practice, I still do, is treat cancer patients in their families. And cancer patients, of course, often are facing the possibility of death. So one of the questions, and oftentimes, the ones who deal with their diagnosis best are people who say, okay, I don't have that long to live. I'm going to reprioritize my life. I'm going to really think about what's most important to me for the 6 months I have left. So one of the things that I do in my practice with couples who are just racing through life together on parallel tracks, not connecting at all, is to ask them, okay, if you had 6 months left to live, how would you want to spend it? Who would be the most important people that you would want to draw close to? Who would you not value as much? How would you want to spend that 6 months? And I first kind of take people into a very relaxed state so their minds are really free to imagine.
And what's that doing? Is it helping to crystallize whether they should be with this person? To clarify things?
Sometimes, but It's more that, oh my God, I'm wasting my life trying to make more money. Why am I doing that when I've got this love right here? What's more important to me, making more money or creating more love between us? That's what it comes down to oftentimes.
How do you know when to quit a relationship? How do I know if the relationship I'm in is bad, is not good? Because relationships are incredibly tempting. They tempt us back. They offer comfort, which sometimes necessarily isn't healthy comfort, but they're very hard to leave. And I actually had a conversation with one of my friends recently. I always talk about my friends because it's the only way I know to draw on case studies. So instead of me just coming with something hypothetical, I think about the challenges my friends face. And I've got a particular friend who's been in a relationship for many, many years, 7, 8 years. Relationship is broken down. And he naturally, because the relationship is broken down, is like jumping to repair. But I wonder if he should even repair, because they've broken up 6 times. They've gone through this cycle 6 times. So I'm like, are they just rushing back together for the comfort of the relationship? Or should they, take a moment to say, is this even right? But this also, the answer here applies to people that are in relationships that have those thoughts in their mind. Is this the right one? How do you know? How do you know if this is a problem we can solve and should solve, or this is just the wrong person?
Therapy helps. Has your friend gone to therapy?
Not-
Good therapy?
Not with their partner, no.
Then they don't know. In other words, a lot of people don't know how to deal with conflict, for example. Nobody's taking relationships 101 in high school, right? To learn how to deal with conflict, or to learn how to be more vulnerable to somebody else and be more open and so on. So people don't know how to have good relationships. That's part of what drives the work that John and I do. People just don't know how to do it. And if they did know, they could change those patterns. And so, with your friend, for example, oftentimes, when people have been together for over, a couple of years, they create patterns that are like dark holes. They're like black holes that have this tremendous gravitational pull. And so they keep sinking down in the same patterns over and over and over and over again, right?
Well, that's exactly what happens.
That's your friend. But you can change those patterns once you know and practice what the alternatives are.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think it's
Not
when,
the partner,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
pattern.
An alternative pattern.
Yes.
I think when that fondness and admiration system, the system of affection and respect, love and respect, is gone and gets replaced by denigration, belittling, contempt. That's the time to bail.
And you've seen this in your work.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
This is like much of what you guys, are known for, is this. And whenever I hear people talking about the Gottmans, they're always talking to me about the idea of contempt and the 4 horsemen.
Right.
For anyone
But
that
see,
doesn't know.
those things can change too. Those things can change too. That often is what constitutes the bad pattern. Or there's been so much of that now they avoid each other altogether. And there's huge emotional distance.
What are the 4 horsemen then, before we talk about how we would go about changing, if possible, these things? For anyone that doesn't know, and how you found these 4 horsemen.
Well, Bob Levinson and I, when we were doing our research, the first thing we looked at was what's the ratio of positive to negative emotion in a conversation.
So how did you conduct this experiment?
Really just observing couples talking about how their day went.
How do you
End of
observe
the day.
Well, wait.
Yeah.
Bring them into the lab.
A lab?
First of all.
What's the lab?
The lab was a room where they sat facing one another. There were video cameras here and there that were focused on each individual and their faces and their body language. There was what was called a jiggleometer, how much they moved in their chairs, how much the chairs moved. Physiological measures, what was happening to their heart rate, as
Blood
well.
velocity, respiration,
Respiration.
skin conductance.
And all of that data that was pulled from those measures was all synchronized, hundredth of a second by hundredth of a second. And they would talk for, let's say, 15 minutes about the events of the day. And then they were asked to talk about a problem they hadn't solved and to try and solve it or talk about it. So that, ends up being conflict. And
then a positive topic.
And then a positive topic.
Or in the apartment lab, they just hung out for, 12 hours before they went to sleep. And the cameras just rolled while we collected physiological data. So that ratio...
You really spied on them.
Huh?
You really spied
We
on them.
spied on them, right.
Except they knew they were being spied.
Yeah. And
For 12 hours, you watch them just sort of chill and hang out together, couples.
that's right.
How many couples have you...
130.
And how many couples have been in the lab in total?
3,000.
3,000.
Yeah.
And they were followed, so then they'd be brought back every couple of years,
Right.
To see,
How the relationship changed.
right. So the procedures would be repeated every couple of years for as long as 20 years.
And what did
What
you
would
find?
happen?
So that initially that ratio of positive to negative interaction, even talking about how their day went, or especially during conflict, for people who are in happy, stable relationship, it averaged 5 positives for every negative.
Positives about the other person or about life?
No, just positive emotion, like
Let's describe positives. So a positive can be nodding your head. It can be smiling. It can be asking a question.
affection, humor, validation,
Showing interest.
interest in the other person. Negative would be anger, irritability, disappointment, hurt, disgust, contempt. Shared humor was another big positive that turned out to be very important. So that ratio of positive to negative averaged 5 to 1 in relationships that were stable and happy.
During
And
conflict.
During conflict. And 0.8 to 1 in relationships that were headed for disaster, either splitting up or being together unhappily. But certain negatives were much more predictive of relationship demise. And they were criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling.
So let's define what those are. So criticism means blaming a problem on a personality flaw of your partner. Like, you're so lazy, you'd never think to clean up the kitchen, wouldn't you? Or, God, you're thoughtless. You didn't even call me when you were going to be late. Thoughtless, lazy, inconsiderate,
Always,
selfish.
Okay.
Right?
So
Those.
making it about their personality and their character.
That's right. That's
Okay.
a criticism. Contempt is the worst. That's sulfuric acid for a relationship, where you're looking down your nose with disgust, as well as criticism of the partner.
Superiority.
So give me an example of that.
You're such an idiot, You just never get things right, It's just, you're just not like me, I'm thoughtful and considerate. You're
stupid.
You're a narcissist,
Right. Right. So there's the criticism, but it's making yourself superior to that other person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little disgust in it. Snide kind of stuff.
Sarcasm is a good example. Mockery.
Especially in front of people.
Yeah, right.
Awful.
So the person says, well, I really care how you feel. You really care how I feel. Ugh. So that's contempt.
Yeah.
Stonewalling is really emotional withdrawal
Don't forget defensiveness.
and defensiveness.
Yeah. So defensiveness is the one we all.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get over, which is, you either kind of whine like an innocent victim. I did too pay the bills on time. What do you mean?
I'm thoughtful.
I am thoughtful. Don't you remember? Blah, blah, blah. Or it's counterattack. Oh, yeah?
You're so perfect, huh?
You never clean up the kitchen. It's that counterattack.
Do you find that insecure people are more defensive?
Sure.
I have this theory that if your self-esteem and your self-perception of yourself is fragile, then anyone poking at it at all causes such extreme pain
Right.
that you live in this state of like, I have never done anything wrong, I can't possibly do anything wrong. And if someone points out something you've done wrong,
Right.
it's so painful if you're insecure.
Right. Walking on
It's like tickling it.
eggshells.
Yeah, exactly. It's like playing with like an open wound.
Yeah.
So,
It's like you're a walking burn victim.
yeah.
You know, the way I like to describe it, because I've been there, I know what that's like, is, you know, the earth. If you take a picture of the earth, and the earth has this very thin crust on it, and then you go down some layers, and in the center is this boiling hot lava, you know, that burns you to death. Well, somebody says to you, why didn't you pay the bills on time? And the earth opens up, you fall through that crack and straight down into that hot lava of self-loathing that is agony, absolute, and you feel like you're getting burned to death. So you can't allow yourself to step into that crack and say, oh God, you're right, I didn't.
So you defend.
You defend. Oh, yeah? Well, I'm the one who does all the bill paying. What are you doing? You know, it's defensiveness.
Well, in that case, it sounds like that's fundamentally linked to some kind of trauma. Because you didn't pay the bills to the average person would be, yeah, I know, sorry, my bad. But if
Yeah.
that's linked to maybe, I don't know, your childhood where your father or your mother or the bullies on the playground told you that you're so forgetful, Steve or Julie, you're the most forgetful person ever, and then they punched you. You could get to, 40.
Can be.
Yeah.
Can be. And then stonewalling, this was one that was so fascinating because you could have, a pair of people sitting just like this, looking perfectly normal. But you notice that one is completely shutting down, not showing anything on their face, in their body, maybe looking away or just glazed, looking and not saying a word. And that's not for seconds, it's for minutes. And what's actually going on, because these guys, John and his colleagues measured physiology, is that they feel so attacked that their heart rates are zooming up above 100 beats a minute, which just sitting here,
They're secreting cortisol and adrenaline massively. And so they're shutting down.
yeah, it's going into fight or flight. Only you're not facing a saber-toothed tiger, you're facing your partner.
You said there, Julie, that you could go into that state for minutes or even longer.
Yes.
But as you were saying that, I was thinking about my friend's relationship, which kind of started this conversation, and whether they should get back together or not. You were totally right when you said there's clearly a pattern, because the fact that they're getting back together, then breaking up, then getting back together, then breaking up, then breaking up, shows that they don't have the tools to resolve whatever issue they keep smashing into.
Right.
But much of why I think, from what I've heard, or at least a symptom of their relationship, is stonewalling, but it's not minutes. One of them, it's months, I think. I think basically, I only know this because I was shown some text messages, and I looked at the text messages and I was like, oh my God, there's like, whenever you talk about something that might be a little bit challenging or whatever, or you even ask, how do you think the relationship's going? The other partner is like vacant. Like vacant, nothing. It's like they're not expressing their needs, they're not saying what they feel, they're spiraling in their own mind, and then they're just breaking up with you. It's kind of, I don't know whether that's stonewalling, but it's also what you were saying about lacking the tools. That was at the heart of the relationship, is one partner spirals independently, and then without you even knowing it, you thought everything was okay, breaks up with you. To give more context, well, this is a homosexual relationship between two men.
Yeah.
So, we talked earlier on about the woman sometimes the instigator of expression of needs.
Yeah.
It's
That's
just,
right. Oh, that's so sad. So it sounds like both of them have terrible difficulty making themselves vulnerable to the other and saying what they feel. And it may be that if they tried that early on in the relationship, the other one said something very negative to them back that felt punishing in terms of expressing their emotion. And so they made a choice oh God, I can't make myself vulnerable. I'm going to get hurt if I do that. So they shut.
But this point about men not being very good at expressing their feelings, do we, with that in mind, and with the knowledge that expression of feelings are good for building connection, how come homosexual relationships with men work? And I don't know, is there any data to show that they last less longer than a relationship where a woman is stereotypically more likely to, talk about the challenges and the issues and bridge the connection? Someone's got to have done the research on this subject.
Well, we've studied gay and lesbian couples and compared them to heterosexual couples as well. And
For 12 years.
Generally, they're less defensive. They have a better sense of humor, and they're much more gentle in the way they bring up an issue with one another.
Men or women in those homosexual relationships?
Men and women together. Gay men and lesbians are better than heterosexuals, and they're much less possessive and domineering as well. Much more of a sense of equality in their relationships.
Well, especially,
So do we...
wait, pause. Pre-AIDS, men gave each other much more autonomy to have sex outside the relationship, right? But then AIDS kicked in.
And on these 4 horsemen, a word you didn't mention, but I wondered if it fit in there somewhere, is the word gaslighting, which has become quite popular in society. What is gaslighting? How does that show up?
So in physically violent relationships that are characterologically violent, where there's a perpetrator and a victim, those kinds of domestic violence, quite often the perpetrator is communicating to the victim that everything about their reality is wrong. They never raise their hand against this person. It's just all imagined. They're basically doing, what happened to Ingrid Bergman in that movie Gaslight, where she's married to this guy who tries to convince her that she's mentally ill, that her whole sense of reality is wrong. So he does things like change the order of the pictures, and in the home, steal jewelry that he's given her that he says comes from his mother and grandmother. He steals it, and then he says, where is it? You lost it? You're so forgetful. And he's constantly sort of making her feel like she's going crazy. There never was a painting there. What are you talking about? There was never a painting there. And and he's actually removed it, or he's changed the order of the pictures, trying to make her think she's crazy. And even her sense of reality needs him to determine what's real and what's not real. And that's where gaslight comes from.
Let me mention something, because that word, you're right, it's really being bandied about commonly, and people have got it wrong. Speaking of gaslighting. So people, for example, who have a conflict, and they have totally different points of view about what happened during the conflict, who remembers it better, And one will say, well, you said this. No, I didn't. I never said that. That they're calling gaslighting. And it's not. That is not gaslighting. So it's being misused in the culture all the time.
Right.
Because people always have 2 points of view about
different perceptions in any situation.
That's right. They have, everybody has their own individual filters, and so they're going to hear some things and not hear other things and distort things and so on. Memory isn't perfect. And so they're always going to have 2 points of view. And people can get locked into struggles over, no, this is the absolute reality of what happened. No, it isn't. This is. And there is no absolute reality. It's all about perception. So people are calling that gaslighting.
And that's not.
And
correct.
it isn't.
Yeah.
That's not what gaslighting is.
At what point does it become gaslighting? Is that when you're intentionally trying to...
Make the other person crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Believe that they're crazy so they don't trust themselves.
And these violent relationships that,
Right.
man will slap the woman across the face and says, "Damn it, you just hit me. I never hit you. I never touched you."
Yeah, I spoke to a domestic violence victim once who told me that her partner, when after like love bombing her, so immediately like, throwing all this affection onto her and, very, very quickly, he would then start like hiding her stuff. So he'd put her car keys in the fridge. And he'd be like, why did you put your car keys in the fridge?
That's gaslighting.
Yeah, that's gaslighting.
Perfect description.
So then she thinks she's going crazy. So he goes, well, I'm going to have to take your car keys.
Often.
And then she can't, she's lost her car.
That's right. Often done in the service of extreme jealousy.
Yeah.
And socially isolating the victim.
Yeah.
We've treated domestic violence a lot. And I'll never forget this one guy who would put a mark on the tire and a mark on the driveway that matched up, that lined up. And at the end of the day, if those marks didn't line up, he'd beat her up. Even if she just went to the grocery store, it didn't matter.
Who did you fuck today?
Right.
Where'd you go? Nowhere. Oh, yeah, right. You liar. You whore. You.
This is the typical and naive question people ask when they hear a story like that. Their head goes, I would never stay with someone that did that to me.
Blah, blah, blah.
But
Not true.
Yeah.
Not true. First of all, it doesn't happen all at once. Secondly, oftentimes the victim, usually, in a hetero, it's a woman, has her confidence beaten down. So it's not just physical, it's also mental abuse. God, you're an idiot. Man, are you stupid? And she starts doubting her own judgment, her own intuition. Plus, I don't think you could survive out there. Nobody else is going to want you. And she starts to believe it.
And she also has a dream that he's going to change.
Yeah.
Because he's so remorseful of what he did to her. He promises he'll never happen again. And he loves her, and he's going to get this under control.
Is he a narcissist, or is it possible that someone who isn't a narcissist can perform that behavior? Or is the word narcissist another word that's just thrown around too much?
Very good.
Yeah.
A+.
Yeah, I thought so.
It's another word. Everybody is narcissistic, Steve. Everybody is. Narcissism basically comes from the instinct for self-preservation. You're thinking about, okay, me, what do I need? What do I need? How am I going to get it? And so on. I've got to really, think about taking care of myself sometimes. They call that a narcissist. But the way it really is meant is shorthand for a narcissistic personality disorder, which is extreme narcissism, where there is no empathy whatsoever. The person has no conscience whatsoever. They can hurt you, they can do everything that damages you, and they take absolutely no responsibility for it and blame the victim. So somebody who, says, I didn't fail, you made me fail. This is what you did that set me up, blah, blah, blah. So everybody around them is a reflection of who they are themselves. And so they only see other people, in two dimensions.
How do you go about, you said you spoke to couples and women who had been through domestic abuse, and, how do you go about helping? Is this part of the reason why you're in the UK at the moment? You talked about your
Trauma.
Oh, it's trauma.
It's trauma. At Oxford, we're talking about trauma.
And also affairs. You're
affairs.
Talking about affairs. You're talking about treating affairs.
Right.
That's right.
So I've never really heard the phrase treating affairs as if it's a condition per se. But if there has been an affair or some form of infidelity, can it be treated?
75% so far in our research cure rate.
And when you say affair, What are you throwing in that bucket in terms of the definition of an affair? Is that a text or is that
It can be an emotional affair as well as a physical affair.
A physical affair.
a physical affair, sex?
Yeah, it
kissing?
usually, so it can be emotionally, falling in love with somebody else without physical consummation, or physical consummation with somebody that you've fallen in love with, or just having sex outside the relationship, not an emotional connection, but just having sex when the agreement is monogamy.
So it almost always involves deception.
Right, always. It always does. Yeah. That's a big part of it, is the deception and the broken trust. What affairs do is they turn, the hurt partner's world upside down. Everything they believed about the partner is wrong. Everything that they thought they shared in terms of values is wrong. So, you can trust what the person says. No, you can't. Because they weren't staying at work late. They were going to so-and-so's apartment.
It's like I didn't know this person.
Yeah,
I didn't know this.
right.
Yeah, who
That's
are
right.
you?
Who are you? And, relationships are really oftentimes, especially committed ones, are the foundation for our whole life. We build everything around that oftentimes. Our sense of family, even our sense of work sometimes, what work we choose, how we live our lives. Purpose and meaning that we give our lives together. And when there's betrayal like that, and the person that you thought your partner was isn't, then that whole thing cracks and falls to the ground. It shatters.
And how many people, how many couples cheat in any of those definitions that you've described?
Well, we don't really know, but probably around 30% of all couples is
You think it's
a
that high?
conservative estimate.
Conservative, really? I've
Yeah.
heard 15% of
Yeah.
men and women. And the thing that's interesting is that the stats for women having affairs has pretty much caught up to men now. But
Right.
here's why. Before the 70s and the women's liberation movement, women were stuck at home. They weren't out in the world working. They didn't have access to other men.
The milkman and the plumber
right.
was
And the
most
mailman, maybe.
Mail.
They were stuck at home having coffee around their, kitchen table with their neighbor woman, whoever. But once they entered the workforce, then they had access to a whole field of
Yeah.
potential people out there.
Right.
And so,
It's interesting as you
caught
say
up.
that, Julia. I was thinking through all the implications of what would happen in a woman's life when she went out to work, and one of the other things is she would become more independent in every sense of the
yeah,
word.
exactly. That's right. She doesn't have to stay in a marriage. She can support herself financially.
So how do you treat an affair?
So we developed a model based on our research called the Tone, Attune, Attach, AAA model. And here's what, in a nutshell, here's what it involves. Again, it has to be done in therapy. You really can't do this stuff at home. It's too intense. First, the person who did the betraying needs to respond totally transparently to every question the hurt partner asks them. However, the hurt partner shouldn't probably ask about the kind of sex they have. And here's why. I mean, it's an important thing. Almost every person who's suffered through an affair has PTSD from post-traumatic stress disorder. And part of post-traumatic stress disorder is having these images or flashbacks, if you will, come into your mind unbidden. You don't want them there, but they come in anyway. And traumatic memory is different than regular memory. Regular memory, you have a few little fragments, something said, and so on. Traumatic memory, everything comes up at one time. The images, the smells, the sounds, the adrenaline, cortisol, and so on. So when a woman asks questions about sex and then gets the answers, guess what? So her images now are like flooding her mind with the kind of sex they had, the partner and the affair partner, that plague her to an even greater degree. And it's horrible. So, atone, answering the questions, and then saying I'm sorry 1,000 times, and really meaning it. Really, really meaning it. I've had many, both men and women who've cheated on their partners or had affairs who end up crying during that phase. Even the strongest of men will cry when they realize how hurt the woman is, or the man. The other thing that the betraying partner needs to do is to listen to the other partner's feelings without defensiveness. Just listen. But in the therapy, a lot of times what happens is that the therapist has to help shape the hurt partner's expression of emotion, to take it out of criticism and out of contempt into, I feel destroyed. I feel like my world has fallen apart. I feel so empty, so abandoned, so rejected. So she has to describe, or he has to describe, their own feelings, not how bad the partner was, which is typically what happens at home. So that's the atonement phase. Attune, and this has to come after atonement, not as the first thing. They start looking at the actual marriage or relationship itself and what was wrong with it. And a lot of times what you see are couples who at first might have had terrible conflict. It was so bad they started avoiding conflict. Once they avoided conflict, they got more emotionally distant. And the person who did the betraying got lonely. So oftentimes the affairs are not about just getting more sex. They're about loneliness and beginning to talk to somebody else about how unhappy they are. And then the third phase is attachment. So it's like reattaching to your partner. That second phase is really rebuilding trust. And the third phase is recommitting to the relationship. And this is not always true. I've seen the opposite. But in many cases, the sexual relationship doesn't resume until phase 3. Especially if the woman is the one who's been betrayed. But there are some where the woman will kind of throw herself at the man sexually to compete with the affair partner and be better than the affair partner. So, it can be both.
It's I've got so many questions so the first phase was the atonement, attunement, and then attachment. So many questions at different phases in that. There's so many of them. I'll start from the top, which was, how many times do you apologize?
1,000.
Because is it true that at some point you've got to kind of move on?
No, you have to know what you're apologizing for.
Well, that's important, but here's why. And, probably some of your audience, especially therapists, may disagree with this, but I've treated it for 50 years. PTSD doesn't disappear. It doesn't disappear.
Right.
It can episodes of getting triggered can be much less frequent over time, or maybe not as intense, but it never disappears. So, for example, you may apologize a lot during the therapy. Things get better. And then, a couple months later, after you leave therapy, the man is late home from work and doesn't call. Well, guess what happens? Boom! she goes into full-blown PTSD reenactment, basically, where it's gotten triggered again, and oh my God, he's doing it again. You see, that's why you can't stop apologizing and just put it behind you. You don't put PTSD behind you. You see.
Interesting. I guess that's the cost of cheating, is the person
Yeah, it really is.
never be the same again.
It's a high
That's
cost.
right.
It's a very high cost.
That's right.
Yeah.
I wrote insecurity as you were talking as a note, and I think what I meant when I wrote that is being cheated on must create a huge amount of like lasting insecurity. And it kind of links to the second thing I was writing down, which is this whole question of like, why did you cheat on me? And it must be, for a lot of people, difficult to answer that question, because if it's, and also I was thinking some people don't even know. They don't actually, so they might try and hazard a guess and do even more harm.
Right.
Well, I think it's because you gained some weight, or I think, well, I think you smell, or you know what I mean? When actually it's
Right.
something much deeper. So like,
That's right.
you know, so is that a useful question to even ask in that setting?
It is, but again, in the setting of therapy, you need the safety, hopefully with a good therapist, you need the safety that the therapist provides, where, you know, why did she cheat? Well, because you're an asshole, you know. No, that's not going to work. You know, so I once treated a couple where he had 57 affairs, and they had 3 children under the age of 10, and he'd had 57 affairs. And 3 of them, he actually fell in love with. Okay, so, you know, you can easily say, oh, because the guy has a sexual addiction or blah, blah, blah. No, not true. The real reason was that he had been raped as a kid, and he feared, oh my God, maybe I'm a latent homosexual, which in his culture was the worst in the worst way. So he had to keep proving to himself that he was heterosexual, over and over and over again. And as soon as we put that together, because he just completely blocked it out for the most part, boom, the affair stopped.
Wow. It just goes to show how complex it can be.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's atonement, not forgiveness.
Right.
Big difference there. Because when therapists emphasized forgiveness in this affair situation, they would blame the betrayed partner for not forgiving.
Is acceptance important?
Acceptance of what?
The situation you find yourself in.
No,
No.
that's bad. Because you're accepting something that's hurtful. It's terribly hurtful.
The reason I asked that particular question is because I was thinking about my friend who's going through this breakup, and much of the agony that I see himself in is because he's like refusing to accept the situation, it seems, and all the resistance.
What's the situation?
Situation is he's basically someone's broken up with him.
Oh,
And so it's this constant rumination of maybe if I do this I can change it, or maybe if I go almost like thinking back in time to see if he could time travel and fix all his mistakes. And I was saying to him, and this might be bad advice, but I was saying to him, like, I think the first thing is we have to accept that this is the situation you find yourself in,
Yes.
and then we'll work from here.
oh, that's a whole different meaning of
Okay.
acceptance.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean accept the fact that they cheated on you and like deal
Right,
with it.
that's
Like,
how I
Yeah.
interpreted it at first. But yes, acceptance, I would call that grounding in the reality. Of what you have right now. And then, really grounding in it. Okay, I really have made all these mistakes. And, if the partner maybe, tiny little teeny weeny spark left, I call it an ember that in therapy it can be blown on, to bring back the fire and the passion in the relationship. Hooray. But as John was pointing out, sometimes the person is only feeling the ashes of the past relationship. There are no embers left.
This is a difficult question to ask, but have you ever seen cheating help a relationship?
Oh, every time
Really?
when there's recovery. Every time. Not every time, but very, very often. Very often when they get help. When they get help. If they don't get help, it's not going to, it's worse. But when they get help, the help can help them change all the patterns in the relationship and help them learn who the other person really is, what their needs really are, how they want you to turn up in the relationship that they had no idea of before. So it can create more intimacy, different kind of trust, of course, but more intimacy and more connection.
Betrayal is always
Yeah.
implied prior conflict avoidance. Instead of talking to your partner about what's wrong, you talk to somebody else about what's wrong with you, with the partner.
What are some of the, so you're telling me that 74% of the time affairs can be treated, 75% of the time affairs can be treated, roughly? What are some of the revelations or realizations that you've had over all the years of your work about the nature of humans and relationships and love and dating and all these things that always stick front of mind for you? I'm going to ask you first, John, from a research perspective, is there any particular research which you would consider to be your favorite research that was most pivotal for the way you think that you haven't mentioned yet?
I think that relationships can be great sources of longevity, health, great context for raising children. And so they can have this wonderful magic that is health-giving, longevity-giving. And it just requires certain conditions to be met. And those are the principles that make relationships work.
Is there a particular piece of research that you're most fond of? And I know that's
That
difficult.
he's done or somebody else has done?
Both.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole field of social epidemiology which has emerged in the last 50 years, really shows that relationships are life-giving and longevity-giving, given today's level of medical treatment of chronic illness. It's really relationships that make the difference, and really make the difference in raising kids.
The last thing I want to talk to you about is this idea of bids for connection, because it's a very popular topic, and there's lots of people online and on TikTok discussing the importance of bids for connection.
Right.
What are bids for connection?
Well, in this apartment lab that Julie and I built, there were 3 cameras, and at the time, it was only possible to technologically merge 2 of them in a split screen. So the people in the control room had to use the cameras in a particular way so that they had a split screen. And they very quickly saw that quite often one person was trying to get the other person's attention or interest. And so they would focus on that person who was saying, oh, look at that beautiful boat going by. And then they focus the other camera on the partner and see the response. And so you had this, sort of two-step interaction. One attempting to get the partner's attention, making a bid for connection, and the other person either responding or not responding, or responding irritably, turning toward, or turning away, or turning against. And it turns out that 6 years later, the couples who eventually divorced, when they looked back 6 years earlier, they had turned toward these bids an average of 33% of the time. Whereas the couples who were still married, they looked back 6 years later, they had turned toward their partner's bids 86% of the time. So this huge difference, 33% versus 86%.
You mentioned 3 responses to a bid for connection. So my partner comes up to me, she goes, babe, look at this. You mentioned they turn towards them, which is me turning towards my partner and saying, what is it, babe?
It's not physical.
Okay.
Mind you.
Well,
so
could be.
No. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of people interpret turning toward as, oh, you turn your body towards your partner.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's just saying it's responding to your partner's desire for interest or attention.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then turning away is me not responding.
Not responding.
Ignoring them.
Then turning against would be...
An irritable
Hostility.
kind of response.
Stop interrupting me. I'm working.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 86% of the couples that stayed together were those that turned toward, i.e. they acknowledged the bid for connection.
No.
The couples who stayed married had turned toward bids an 86% of the time. So when their partner tried to get their attention, probability of them turning toward was 0.86.
Okay.
86% of the time they turned toward. The other thing that was interesting was that people who turned toward a lot tended to have a sense of humor together during conflict, which reduced physiological arousal. So how do you get people to laugh together when they're disagreeing? And it turns out that if you increase turning toward, people spontaneously develop more of a sense of humor about themselves during conflict. That was a really amazing finding of one of my graduate students, Dennis Driver.
You can teach people to turn toward, acknowledge those bids.
Oh, yeah, you can. Sure. Just increase awareness.
I've struggled with that in my relationships. I've not been very good at turning towards, i.e. when my partner makes a bid for connection, I've not been great at. I often saw it as like an interruption, or you knew I was busy, or like you.
Right.
But from doing this podcast, in fact, and speaking to lots of great people like you guys, in those moments, I go, Steve, fuck the laptop. Just turn them mid-email. Hi, what's up? And it helps.
Let me give you a suggestion, because all of us have times when we can't turn towards, right?
Yeah.
Because we've got a deadline or we've got something. But what you can do is say, honey, I would really love to listen to you right now, but I've got to finish this project. After I do another hour of work, can we then talk?
Yeah.
You see? So you're putting a bookmark in there that says, I want to talk to you, but I've got this competing
That's a nice way of saying it.
goal that I have to finish. But then we'll talk.
My partner says to me, it's how you say it.
Oh.
You know, so I've just got to be like actually turn my body language so I'm acknowledging the person, not like saying it while without missing a keystroke.
Yep.
Turn my body.
生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。生命力药水不足。
接目标就在附近。警戒目标就在附近。警戒目标就在附近。警戒目标就在附近。警戒目标就在附近。
在心理学中，最顶级的人格魅力就是真实和自洽，能把这两者发挥到极致的人会自带魅力，不自觉的就很招人喜欢。关于这一点，可以去看我之前发过的这篇对于人格魅力的解读。人格魅力的重点不是魅力，而是人格。今天我们开一期人格品鉴，分析鉴宝博主听权。很多人分析了他爆火的原因，有人说是懂得多，有人说是搞笑。其实网上懂得多或者搞笑的博主很多，他被更多人喜欢的底层逻辑来自于极强的人格打底。今天这条视频带你了解听权身上的人格魅力是什么。第一，极度坦诚。之前我们有一期视频分析过，真正拥有人格魅力的人其实都是极度坦诚的。因为极度坦诚，首先需要有强大的稳定内核，在内心就笃定的相信自己，喜欢自己，认可自己。这样的坦诚就不用通过炫耀、夸大或者外面的掌声来肯定自己的价值。很多人为什么不能做到极度坦诚呢？因为我们会有很多的担心，担心自己不够好被别人看见，担心暴露自己的内心会觉得羞耻，担心说了某些话会得罪一些人。这些担心都来自于我们内在的能量不足，对自己的喜欢、笃定和信任不足，所以特别容易害怕被看穿，害怕别人觉得我们不够强大。真正强大的人是可以心口如一的去表达真实的想法和真实的情绪的，因为能够接受选择带来的一切后果，所以就能坦诚的选择用最简单最自然的方式和这个世界相处。有好多人把那种我有什么说什么，我很直当成是坦诚，这和坦诚是两码事情。坦诚的人并不是直愣，坦诚是你内在是正向的，允许自己做自己，允许别人做别人，输出给他人的是光明向上的力量。看听权的直播，我们就可以感受到这种自然的坦诚。对面不管是什么样的人，不管遇到什么样的状况，好与不好，他都无惧表达，坦诚大方。但又不是用直愣的言语让人不适，而是用一种独有的幽默的方式来输出观点。幽默就是听权的第二个人格魅力。大家不要小看幽默，从心理学的角度来说，幽默是一种非常高级且成熟的防御机制。幽默是智慧的体现，它需要你拥有足够的机智，能够在不同的情景中迅速做出反应，并且以一种非常轻松愉快的方式表达出来。它同时也是情商的展示，只有足够了解人性，才能做到在恰当的时机恰如其分的表达，不多一分不少一毫，正好让大家开心又不感到冒犯。很多人会误以为幽默是一种刻意的讨好或者内在的自卑，但是恰恰相反，让人舒适、心生好感的幽默